Don't waste your time. Life-changing story in English. The 1,000 Marbles. A lesson in time and life. Tom Reynolds was a man who never stopped moving. At 54 years old, he was the owner of a successful construction company, a man who had built his life brick by brick, dollar by dollar. He had a beautiful home, a loving wife, and 2 children, both grown and living their own busy lives. Yet, despite all of his achievements, Tom often felt restless. His work consumed him. He was up before the sun and home long after it set. He had spent decades chasing success, always telling himself that someday he would slow down. Someday, he'd take that vacation with his wife, spend more time with his kids, play golf like he used to. But someday never came. One Saturday morning, Tom was in his garage fixing a broken cabinet. His neighbor, an older man named Mr. Johnson, walked over, sipping a cup of coffee. "Morning, Tom," the old man said, leaning against the workbench. "Morning, Bill," Tom replied without looking up, tightening a screw. Mr. Johnson had been Tom's neighbor for nearly 20 years. He was in his late 70s, retired, and always seemed to have time. Time to sit on his porch with his wife, time to chat with the mailman, time to watch the sunrise. Tom often wondered how it felt to live at that pace. Mr. Johnson placed a small cloth bag on the workbench. "Got something for you." Tom wiped his hands on a rag and picked up the bag. It was heavier than he expected. "What's this?" The old man smiled. "Open it." Tom untied the string and tipped the contents onto the workbench. A pile of marbles spilled out, smooth and cool to the touch. There were a lot of them. Tom raised an eyebrow. "Marbles?" Mr. Johnson nodded. 1,000 of them." Tom chuckled. "Are we starting a game?" Mr. Johnson laughed. "Not quite. Let me tell you a story." Tom leaned against the workbench, intrigued despite himself. "When I turned 60, Mr. Johnson said, I did some math. The average person lives about 75 years. That's about 3,900 Saturdays. But at 60, I only had about 780 left. I wanted a way to remind myself that time is precious, so I went to the store and bought 1,000 marbles. Every Saturday, I took one out and threw it away." Tom furrowed his brow. "Why?" "Because it reminded me that each Saturday was one less I had left. Every week, I watched my time running out. And you know what happened?" Tom shook his head. "I started making changes," Mr. Johnson said. "I stopped worrying about things that didn't matter. I spent more time with my wife. I called my kids more. I took long walks, watched more sunsets. I stopped saving my best wine for special occasions and started drinking it whenever I felt like it. I realized that my Saturdays weren't infinite." Tom ran a hand through his hair, glancing down at the marbles. "So, why are you giving them to me?" Mr. Johnson smiled. "Because I don't need them anymore. Last week, I took out my last marble. I'm officially living on borrowed time. Every Saturday from now on is a gift, and I wanted to pass the lesson along to someone who might need it." Tom stared at the marbles, the weight of the moment settling over him. He thought of all the Saturdays he had spent working, checking emails, putting off things that truly mattered. How many more did he have left? Mr. Johnson clapped him on the shoulder. "Just think about it, Tom." Then he walked back toward his house, whistling softly. A shift in perspective. That night, Tom lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. He did the math in his head. If he lived to 75, he had about 100 Saturdays left, not much more than what had been in that bag. He thought of all the things had postponed. The fishing trip he had promised his son but never took. The Italy vacation his wife had dreamed of but always got delayed. Jake chuckled. "Yeah, like 10 years ago?" Tom exhaled. "I was thinking, what if we actually do it?" There was a pause. "You serious?" "Completely." A smile was evident in Jake's voice. "I'd love that, Dad." That Saturday, Tom pulled out one of the marbles and held it between his fingers. Before tossing it into the trash, it was gone. But for the first time, he felt like he had truly lived that day, living with intention. Over the next year, Tom's life transformed. He started taking Saturdays off, dedicating them to his family and passions. He and Emily finally booked that Italy trip, and it was the best 2 weeks of their lives. He played guitar again, rediscovering the music that had once brought him joy. He called old friends he had lost touch with. He learned to say no to things that stole his time and yes to things that mattered. Each Saturday, he took out a marble and watched the bag grow lighter. But instead of feeling fear, he felt gratitude. Each lost marble meant another day well lived. The final marble. Years passed. Tom grew older, but he never forgot the lesson Mr. Johnson had taught him. One crisp autumn morning, Tom reached into the cloth bag and found only one marble left. He turned it over in his palm, smiling. Emily walked into the room. "What's that?" "My last marble," he said softly. She sat beside him. "How does it feel?" He looked at her, his eyes filled with peace. "Like every day from now on is a gift." That Saturday, Tom didn't throw the marble away. Instead, he placed it on his nightstand, a reminder that time was precious. But as long as he lived with intention, every moment was enough. Moral of the story: time is the most valuable thing we have. Don't waste it chasing things that don't matter. Spend it with the people and experiences that do. So, how many Saturdays do you have left? And how will you spend them?